Hello and welcome to the Art of Caro. In this video I'm going to be working on a project that I wanted to do for quite a while. And that is a house coat or dressing gown. I'm not quite sure which is the appropriate word. A little backstory to why I want to make this project. As you might have noticed from my other videos, I often wear pajamas. That is because I often don't have the energy to change out of my pajamas into day clothes because I want to conserve what little energy I have to make projects such as this that brings me more energy and manage my anxiety. As you can see, I have a dressing gown. I really love it. I've had it a long time. I got it from my grandparents. Only problem, it is made from polyester. So like right now I get really warm and I want to take it off. Not right now because it's warm now, but when it gets colder later on, I take it off and I get really cold and I put it back on and it goes like that. So I want to make a dressing gown that is in a breathable fabric, so it keeps me warm but not too warm, and it doesn't get me very sweaty. So I had a very specific idea for my dressing gown, and I had to push that project back because I couldn't find the perfect pattern, and I was trying to figure out how I would make my own pattern. But then I found this pattern and I thought it would be perfect to work off of. It's Vogue V1738 and it's a reproduction pattern. It's dated to circa 1984 and it's a coat dress pattern. So it's meant to be sewn up here in the front and open in the side so you can slide it over your head. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to leave it open in the front like a dressing gown. But it's going to be really elegant, and that's the point. I spend a lot of time in my dressing gown and in my pajamas, and I feel really crappy a lot of the time, and that is not really helped by looking sort of run down. So I figure if I make a really pretty dressing gown that I can put on and sort of feel more elegant and sort of like I would want to go out wearing it, it will make me feel a little bit better, just encourage my mind to think more reassuring thoughts. So that is why I'm going with something like this. So I had this fabric sample with this crinkled muslin fabric, and I decided that that would be perfect. It would have texture and would be interesting, and I loved it. So I did 2 sketches and asked my mom which one she thought looked better, and she said the red one, and I agree. She said it reminded her of like an old-time smoking jacket, and I can see where she's coming from. That's not what inspired it, but I agree, and that made it more awesome. The reason I used that color combination is because I was watching Avatar: The Last Airbender season 3 while I was painting it, and if you've seen it, you can see why that color palette was on my mind. So it's sort of inspired by that, and I'm gonna say also by smoking jackets. Yeah. So this is the fabric, and I'm so in love with it. It's crinkled muslin with gold spots on it, and it feels really interesting, and I love how it looks and that it sparkles, and it's a really deep red, so it's not I find it restful to look at. That's important to me. And then as you can see, the color and the cuffs I want to made in a sort of in a more fluffy fabric. So I bought this, and I'm not sure what it's called in English, but in Swedish it's called mysfrotté, and frotté is terry cloth in English, so it's cozy terry cloth. It's really soft and fuzzy, and it's made by cotton and bamboo and a bit of polyester, but it's not gonna be like under my armpits, so I'm not worried about that little bit of polyester. And then I'm going to flatline it with this. It's a cotton flannel duvet cover that I bought on a sale. It's going to be flatlined with the red fabric. So it's going to be really cozy and hopefully warm without being too warm. And I'm probably going to be using some gold piping. It hasn't arrived yet, so I don't know if I'm going to use it or not. We shall see. But now I've babbled on a bit, and I guess we're going to get into the making of this house coat. And I'm super excited. I've already made a mock-up. I had to change the pattern a bit because the size that I chose, that was size 10, was a bit too big on top and a bit too small over the stomach and hips. So I made it bigger on the lower half of my body and just left it a bit large on top because it's a house coat, it doesn't need to be snug. And then I also elongated the arms because, as you can see on the pattern sleeve, the sleeves only goes to just below the elbow, and I wanted long sleeves, so I'm going to make that happen. Yeah, so I'm gonna move on with sewing this, and I hope this video is interesting. So this is going to be the front panel of the dressing gown. This part up until this dot is meant to be sewn together with the other front piece, but since I'm going to leave my dressing gown open because it's going to be a dressing gown instead of a dress, instead what I'm going to do, and I just realized I have to do it like this, is I'm going to unpin the outer fabric with the lining fabric, and it's really good that I haven't managed to baste this together yet, because I was just about to. Yeah, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to unpin these pieces, and I'm going to lay them with the right sides facing each other, and then I'm going to sew this seam from this spot down here together, and then turn them back so they lie like this, with the right sides facing out. And then I'm going to, oh no, before that I'm going to stitch the lining down to the seam allowance, and then I'm going to turn them back to this and iron that down, and then proceed like this piece is meant to be sewn with the side pieces and stuff, and here is where the color is going to go. Yes, I'm going to do this with the two front pieces. Yeah, so that's the first thing I'm going to do. Oh, she did. When I'm actually starting to sew. Yeah, so I'm sewing up that center seam as I talked about, just from the waist down, and then I understitch the lining to the seam allowance, and I press that seam and making sure everything lies as it's supposed to. And after I did this, I basted together all my pieces, lining and outer fabric, but apparently I forgot to film that, so just know that that's something I did to keep all my layers together. Then I'm basting the shoulder dart on the back piece, and then I'm stitching it on the sewing machine. Then I'm clipping into the waist at the back, following the markings, and I baste the waist dart in the back. Then I sew the waist dart on the sewing machine. And then I press the darts after the directions given in the pattern, making sure they're lying nice and flat. And then I'm just stitching them down to the lining, making sure I just catch the lining, and it's just to keep the darts in place. And then I'm pinning up the back seam from the neck to the waist, and stitching them with a straight seam, pressing open the seam allowance and trimming off the seam allowance from the lining, folding over the outer fabric seam allowance from that over that trimmed seam allowance, encasing the raw edge. And then I stitch that with a zigzag stitch, making sure to just catch the seam allowance. Then I press the seam allowance open and hand stitch it down. Then I pin together the extensions at the back from the waist to the hem. And then I baste that together following the markings. Then I lay that open and pin the back underlay to the extensions. Okay, so I have a issue here, and I'm going to unpin here to show you. So it doesn't want to line up properly with the notches, and I think this point is supposed to be up here, and it doesn't do that if I have it at the notches, and it doesn't do it, especially it doesn't do it if I have pinned it from the bottom. So I think I'm just gonna go ahead and pin it like this following how it lines up from the button up, and then we draw the lines. Yeah, so we'll see if that works out or not. I mean, it won't be a catastrophic failure if it doesn't work out right. It might look a bit weird, but I mean, it won't look super weird, so I'm not gonna bother worrying too much about it. Yeah, so I just redraw that line to where it fits better, making sure that it also works on the other side of the fabric, and then I pin that and sew the underlay to the extension on each side just by a straight stitch, and then I sew that marking at the top. So you're supposed to open up that basted seam at the back at the very end, or like close to the end, but I don't want to wait that long, and I also have to open it up if I want to finish off my seam allowances, so I'm going to do that now. So I'm opening up that basted line that I did, and what I talked about with the seam allowance, I'm just finishing off my seam allowance the same everywhere, as you can see. And then I'm folding up that raw edge at the top and basting it down. At the top of the extension, I mean, and basting it down. And then I hand stitch it down, making sure to just catch the lining. And then I remove the basting up there. And then I realized there was a hole in the back, so I just hand stitched that together. I don't know if that was because of the pattern or something I did wrong, but a few quick stitches by hand fixed it. Then I made the markings for the neck in the back, like following the pattern, and then I folded down the seam allowance. I had to cut into the seam at the center back to make this work. And then I interfaced the neck piece of the collar, and I just hand basted it. And then I trimmed the excess seam allowance of the interfacing, removed the basting, and pinned the collar to the folded seam allowance of the back pieces. And that was a bit fiddly, but not very difficult. Then I basted the collar to the back pieces, just to make it easier to hand stitch later on. And then I hand stitched the collar to the back pieces, making sure to keep my stitches as invisible as possible. Then I reinforced the marking on the front piece, and then cut into the front piece following the directions. Then I basted the fisheye dart, the shoulder front, and then I also basted the other dart at the shoulder front, just stopping a bit before I got to the fisheye dart, so it would be easier to sew. Then I machine stitched the fisheye dart and removed the basting. And then I finished the basting on the other dart. And then I sewed that dart on the machine. It's lots of darts in this pattern. Then I stay stitched the side front of the front piece, and then I followed the directions to cut into the side front piece, and then I stay stitched along the seam line there. Then I basted yet another dart, this in the side front piece. If you don't like to make darts, don't make this pattern, because there is so many darts. And then I'm stitching the dart on the machine and pressing it to lay nice and flat against the piece, using a pressing cloth to protect those gold dots on the fabric so they don't melt. And pressing the darts from the front piece as well. And I'm pinning the darts down as I did on the other darts, because I want to stitch down all my darts, even if they are going to be covered up, just to make sure they stay nice and flat.
Then I pin my side front to my front pieces, and there's a lot of curves here, so I have to be very patient and pin the markings first, and then just fiddle with the fabric between to make everything lay as it's supposed to. This is a very forgiving fabric that I'm working with, so it wasn't very difficult to make it do as I want to, but I think if you had a bit more of a rigid fabric, it could be quite bothersome, so keep that in mind if you're going to do this pattern in the future. Then I stitch that seam together, and being very careful around the curve here, because it really wanted to like pucker up and lay weirdly. And here I'm just stitching back and forth to reinforce that point above the fisheye dart on my facing. Then I'm basting the dart in the facing of the collar. And then I'm sewing it on the sewing machine, pressing it, keep it lying nice and flat, and then I'm hand stitching it down. And as I said, I do this for all my darts. Then I'm pinning the collar facing to the front piece, where the collar is, obviously. And it's making sure it follows the curves nicely. And then I'm basting it down by hand. This is also a project you do a lot of hand stitching in, so if you don't like that, maybe do another pattern. And then, following the instructions, I'm trimming off a bit of the collar. Then I'm catch stitching the collar interfacing to the seam allowance, as far as that's possible.
The piping that I ordered has arrived, finally. If you can see that, I'm going to use this around the collar and the cuffs and stuff like that. So I'm really happy with that. I already pre-washed it, so when the time comes to use it, it's ready to go. What I've done is I put on the mock-up I made of the dressing robe, house coat, whatever, and I marked out, where is it? Here. Yeah, I marked out where I want my pocket to go. Can you see that? Yeah, I marked out where I want the pocket to go. So I'm going to cut out a couple of pocket pieces from this pear-shaped pocket pattern I made. Huge pockets. And when I sew up the side seams, I'm going to attach it like I did on my last project. Yeah, so I'm just going to use this to transfer the marking onto my actual pattern pieces. Yeah, like this. So the pocket is going to go here, and then I'm going to attach it to the seam allowance up here, the same as you're supposed to do for this. And then I'm also going to attach it to the waist tape when I put that in. So yeah.
So I'm sewing a piece of the outer fabric to my pocket as a facing to make sure that the pockets are as invisible as possible. And then I'm pinning the shoulder seams and the side seams together of the front of the back pieces and the front side pieces. And now I'm working with quite a bit of fabric, so it's a bit bulky and takes me a while. And then I start sewing them together. And it was a bit difficult here at the shoulder, I'm not gonna lie. That took me a bit of time and patience to make it work properly. And then I'm sewing the side seam here, and when I come to the point I marked that I want to put in my pocket, I just skip over that point, just backstitch, skip the appropriate amount and just start up again, and then keep sewing the skirt portion of this dressing gown. Then I remove the basting around the pocket opening and cut into the seam allowance there. Then I start pinning in my pocket piece. And then I'm sewing the pocket piece to the seam allowance using a zipper foot. First sewing as close as possible to the opening of the side seam, and then as close as possible to the edge of the seam allowance. And then I'm hand stitching the top and bottom of the opening of the pocket. I'm making sure to just encase all the raw seams in some stitching so they won't just rip open. And then I'm sewing a bar at the top and the bottom of the opening to further reinforce my pocket opening. And then I'm stitching the parts that is covered by the seam allowance to the lining.
So I've sewn down the seam allowance for the pocket opening, and I just caught like 1 or 2 threads from the lining fabric. It's not visible on the outside. So now I'm going to French seam these pockets. So I'm just going to push this out to the outside like this, and then I'm going to attach the inside piece, and I cut the piece that's going against that's not gonna be against my body. I made that just out of regular cotton, the same that I used for my facings, and I used my my lining fabric for the piece that's going to be against my body. So, and I made a facing kind of sloppily. It's not straight lines, but it's going to serve its purpose. I just made that out of some scrap fabric I had. So what I'm going to have to do now is sew these two together, and I have to remember that it's going to have to go with this side up, because when I push it through through the pocket opening, this side is going to stay like this. I always kind of want to put this side down, because that feels like it's going to be the correct when you turn it inside out, but it's not, and that would end badly for me. So I'm going to sew this together, and then I'm going to push it through the opening and sew my French seam, and then I'm going to figure out how to attach it to the waist of this house coat or dressing gown, whatever. Yeah, so I'm doing that now.
I'm just pinning together my two pieces of the pocket and sewing it on the machine.
Okay, so now I'm going to push the pocket through the pocket opening and fix up the edges and sew the French seam like this, just pushing it in. And I put the right side facing out, so that's good. Yeah, so what I'm going to do is fiddle around with this and make sure the seam is pushed out as much as possible, and then pin it and then sew 1 centimeter in. I sewed this first seam about 8 millimeters in, so I shouldn't have to clip it down. I just didn't want to have to go get my scissors. Yeah, I didn't want to go get my scissors because they are in the other room. So I hope this will work. Otherwise it's going to be inside the pockets and it won't be noticeable, so yeah. This is how it's going to look on the outside. Pocket opening with the facing. And hopefully it's going to have enough weight in the skirt that the seam is going to be pulled down a bit, so it's going to stay mostly closed, so there won't be much gaping. Yeah, so now I'm gonna fix this up and then I'm going to sew the seam again. So this is how it looks when you're done. And I'm going to put in a twill tape and just attach it somewhere down here, and then attach it up here as well. And I explained why I do that in my last video, the gingham dress video. So, but it's a bit weird, but it works for me, so yeah. Now I'm going to do the other pocket and then I'm going to attach them.
So I'm folding over the top of the pocket and pinning it to the seam allowance, and then I'm hand stitching it down to the lining and the seam allowance for the seam there, to make sure it's in place properly and reinforced. And then I'm sewing that cotton tape onto the pocket, making sure to just catch that inner layer of the pocket and not go through the pocket completely. I should have put this on before I sewed the two pieces together, but yeah, that didn't happen, so this is how it is. So I'm making sure with my fingers underneath the pocket to make sure I don't sew straight through. Then I'm sewing the top portion of the tape to the seam allowance at the side seam, a bit above the top of the pocket. and just making sure that it's all really secure. And this is a look at how I've gotten so far, and I think it looks really nice without sleeves, so maybe that's something that I can make in the future. I don't know, you shall see.
Editing Caro and Sokka here. This video turned out to be a bit longer than I anticipated, so I split it up into 2 parts. So you may want to keep your eyes peeled for the next one. It should be up next Sunday, or maybe the Sunday after that. It all depends on when I can take the reveal footage and how fast I be able to edit that, and the rest that's left of the footage I've got. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. And if you want to see more of my videos in the future, specifically the part 2 of this video, you may want to subscribe and hit the notification bell. May the stars shine upon your faces and have a glorious day. Thank you and goodbye for now. Bye bye.